he thought it was the most important thing he had done. He cared deeply about all the values which are enshrined in it, which are very old-fashioned values, the values of epic poetry and chivalry and all kinds of things which people now connect with the Middle Ages. He cared very much about all these things, and I think that those ancient values are very far from dead.
Wes, min friend, and welcome to yet another video. I have received some requests and messages, my dear friends, that were asking me, well, what's the perfect adaptation then if you are not satisfied with the Rings of Power or anything really that is being done nowadays? And the only thing that you can admit is the first Peter Jackson's trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. How would you then adapt Tolkien? Well then, my dear friends, I have addressed this matter in many videos actually in the past, but since there have been some new subscribers arriving at my channel, I thought, well, why not making a new video and reiterate and just repeat what I've already said many times. After all, I enjoy talking about Tolkien and fantasy in general. It is, after all, something that I have devoted my entire personal and academic life to. So, my dear friends, first we have to realize, we have to remember, and this can't be stressed enough, that who Tolkien was and what he was all about. First and foremost, of course, he was a master linguist and a philologist. That was his greatest passion in his life, languages. He taught Old English at Oxford. He began every series of lectures on Beowulf or Old English in general by the reciting of the opening verses of Beowulf, and so on and so forth. And so that's what he was doing. He was, not only was he studying and teaching dead languages, but he was also creating his own artificial languages. And that started very early at his age. And because he started creating his own languages, he believed that he needed some people to speak those languages. And that's why when he was, fighting in the First World War, in the ditches of the First World War, he started writing the Book of Lost Tales, which then, of course, turned out to be the Silmarillion. His vast, world, the entire world that he started creating back then. And that, of course, then led to the creation of the Lord of the Rings. And he was a very much old-fashioned guy, we could say, nowadays, in modern terms. He was a romantic fella who loved myths and legends, who loved the Middle Ages. And all these things then influenced him at creating his own world. And it was, of course it was, and I have said that many times before, his Arda, his world, and then especially Middle-earth, was based on medieval and pre-medieval Europe and its western and northern and central parts. And then, of course, this was reflected in the peoples living there. So we have to honor that if we are to make a decent adaptation. But before I move on, I will never, ever, whatsoever change my opinion. And that is, I really do not need any adaptation on screen, if you know what I mean. I'm going to read out a longer passage from the famous letter that many people have been citing recently, especially since The Rings of Power came out. And it is the letter to Milton Waldman. And there he talks about the other minds and hands that everybody, as I said, was talking about quite recently. And some people really interpreted this quote, and they only used a very, 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 very short snippet of it. They interpreted it as, other minds and hands to expand upon his world. So that which Prime Video said that we are going to write a book Tolkien never did is all right. And there are other arguments, the stupid ones, idiotic ones, that are saying, well, it's fantasy, so anything goes. Right. So we can make dwarves fly because Tolkien never wrote that they didn't fly, and because it's fantasy, so anything goes. No, there are certain rules within the secondary world. This is the secondary world being the fictitious world that Tolkien created, as he called it, and the primary world being our real world, quote unquote, that we live in. There are certain rules within that secondary world, and we have to stick to the rules. We have to obey the rules. We have to play according to the rules. And if Tolkien established certain rules in his secondary world, we have to obey them. We have to play according to those rules then. And of course then, if we were to honor him, in my eyes, the only proper adaptations, quote unquote, that I am willing to accept, and I'm willing to accept their existence. As Tolkien then said at the end of the quote, which I'm going to read in a bit, is connected with this wielding paint and music and drama. By which I mean, if you are a painter or an illustrator, want to honor Tolkien this way, like John Howe or Ellen Lee, like the Hildebrand brothers. If you want to make music honoring Tolkien, like many bands, like Blind Guardian, so why not? If you want to make some drama, which I consider to be, for example, the BBC audio studio dramatizations, or audiobooks, that is pretty much a dramatization as well. If it is unabridged, why not? I'm all for that. Alas, we cannot make a word-by-word, a short-by-short, accurate adaptation on screen. And that is why I say, if we can't do that, we shouldn't do it at all. We should use our creativity in another way. That is, make our own stories. If there is a movie maker, a creator, who enjoys to make audio-visual content of the fantasy genre, it would be the best to make their own content, their own story. Because nothing compares to human creativity and to human imagination. Now, of course, you have to be creative and skilled. And if you are not, then, well, why should you do it in the first place? So, as far as all those changes that have been done to Tolkien's books in the now, more specifically, the latest adaptation, that is the Rings of Power, I will address this with this quote from the letter. And it goes, "Do not laugh, but once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen. I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story, the larger founded on the lesser in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country. It should possess the tone and quality that I desired, somewhat cool and clear, be redolent of our air, the climate soil of the northwest, meaning Britain and the hither parts of Europe, not Italy or the Aegean, still less the east, and, while possessing, if I could achieve it, the fair elusive beauty that some call Celtic, though it is rarely found in genuine ancient Celtic things. It should be high, purged of the gross and fit for the more red-eyed mind of a land long now steeped in poetry. I would draw some of the great tales in fullness, and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole, and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. Absurd." Now, so that Tolkien was, as I said at the beginning, a very old-fashioned guy who loved the the values of chivalric poetry, and of the old values of the Germanic peoples and the Celts, the ancient Europe, our ancestors. And at the same time, as everybody knows, he was a devout Catholic, so the values of the Catholic faith. So it is in no way reasonable or understandable. It cannot be forgiven if somebody says that they want to present Tolkien to the modern audience, because the modern audience is very, 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 very far away from all these values. These values have been mostly eradicated from the hearts of human beings today. And that means, inevitably, for me, that we cannot adapt Tolkien at all. And not only what Warner Brothers are going to do, not even if Peter Jackson was allowed to make it, because the situation is very much different. All of you have to understand one thing, that Peter Jackson made those films over 20 years ago. It was a very much different situation in Hollywood from today. They would not allow him, and no studio would allow Peter Jackson to make the same thing he did 20 years ago. And that's very briefly and very simplistically said what I would do. I would do nothing. I would not adapt Tolkien at all. Alright then. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. That will be all. Thank you very much for watching. And I'm Maria.
Also, and here I hope I shall not sound absurd, I was from early days grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It had no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought, and found as an ingredient in legends of other lands. There was Greek, Celtic, Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian, and Finnish, which greatly affected me, but nothing English, save impoverished chapbook stuff.